Then on Sports Central, we go over our next schedule preview this offseason, and it's going to be the Cincinnati Bearcats, a team that had an outstanding season in 2021. This team was the first Group of 5 team to make it into the college football playoff. They won the American Athletic and also went 13-1 overall. So, to say the least, it was a great season for the Bearcats. But how will they be in 2022? That's what we'll be going over here today. We'll be going over the players this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with some notable games from last season, and this team being 13-1 overall. Definitely a great season for this team, and it was really unknown whether or not a Group of 5 team could make it into the college football playoff, given all the Power 5 teams, and it's only a 4-team playoff. But there were a lot of upsets last season in the Power 5. There were a lot of teams that fell late in the season, and that led to Cincinnati getting that 4 seed. Plus, this team, the way they played the entire season, rightfully so, this team was very worthy of being in the college football playoff. But looking at the beginning of the season, they beat Indiana on the 18th of September, which at the time, that actually looked like just a great win. Indiana going into the season was expected to be a potential contender in the Big Ten. Turns out they went 2-10, which is a massive surprise. They were probably the biggest disappointment of the season in college football. But in the end, Cincinnati got the win by 2 touchdowns. Beat Notre Dame on the second. That was the most important game of the season outside of, you could say, the postseason. The regular season, that was the most important game for sure, playing Notre Dame. If they were to lose to the Irish in that game, there is a very good chance that Cincinnati would have missed out on the college football playoff and Notre Dame would have been in instead of the Bearcats. So that was a huge win, 24-13. They beat Temple 52-3, beat SMU 48-14, beat the Mustangs huge there. And then they beat Houston in the American Athletic Championship 35-20. That was a big win. Houston, of course, was definitely a very talented team last year. They played really well. And Cincinnati, they played Alabama in the college football playoff semifinal, lost them 6-27. So obviously a tough loss in the semifinals. But no matter what, this is a great starting point for Cincinnati and for Group of 5 teams as well. It shows that Group of 5 teams can make it to the college football playoff, and it's going to be incredibly rare to see a Group of 5 team in the college football playoff as long as it's only 4 teams. But that was massive for the Bearcats getting to the college football playoff. That was the goal from the start, and this team made it there. They were 6-0 in their first 6 games, 6-1 the last 7. So, of course, this team was 13-0 going into the college football playoff, so they were undefeated heading into the postseason. Roster preview going into next season, and this team, we knew going into 2021 this team had some great returning production. 2020 was already a great season for this team. They made it to the New Year's Six, obviously a huge accomplishment, but heading into 2021, this team was returning a lot of that talent already from a great season, so that was a perfect sign that this team would have been, or was going to be, a contender last year, as they very much were. But heading into 2022, kind of a different story. This team is losing a lot of that experience that they had last season. Of course, Desmond Ridder, starting quarterback, he's gone. Last season, he put up over 3,300 yards, 30 touchdowns, 8 picks, and a 65% completion rate, which that is a very excellent stat line from him. That's going to be a tough loss. And Jerome Ford, of course, he deserves more credit. Last season, he put up over 1,500 yards, 20 touchdowns. He was outstanding last year for this team. That's going to be a tough loss. Ryan Montgomery, your second running back, is returning. Last season, he put up just over 350 yards, 4 touchdowns, so it's going to be good to have him back. But, Jerome Ford, he was clearly the top running back last season for this team, so we'll see what happens there in the backfield. Alec Pierce, your top receiver, is gone. That's going to be tough. He put up over 800 yards last season, 8 touchdowns, but you do return your second and third receivers there, in Tyler Scott and then Trey Tucker. Scott last season put up just over 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, and then, of course, Tucker had over 430 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, receiving core, I'm not too concerned. Alec Pierce will be tough, obviously, but you do have some good depth in that position. The backfield, I am a bit concerned about losing Jerome Ford. The quarterback position, obviously, is a question mark as well, considering you're losing your starting one there in Desmond Ridder. Offensive line, you lose 1 on there. You lose 3 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and then 3 in the secondary. So defensively, this team is really losing a lot. 8 starters are going to be leaving this team, and so that's going to be tough there. You're going to have a lack of depth there on that defense. So this team, 2021, the stars just aligned perfectly for this team to be good, or to be great last season. They had so much good experience coming back for the season, and but the problem is now going into 2022, you're losing a lot of that key experience. This team, 2021 was excellent, but heading into 2022, there certainly are a few uncertainties. They got a moderate amount of losses, but how high is the ceiling now going into 2022, considering the loss of talent going into next year? The ceiling for this team is going to be winning a conference championship, I will say. I mean, the New Year's Six is very much within reach for this team still. I mean, Cincinnati's they're not going to be bad next year, but I mean, certainly I think the floor is much lower for this team than it was going into 2021. I mean, the ceiling is still there. I mean, this team could still very well be a national contender next year, but talent-wise, it just does not look that way. Here's your transfer portal and recruiting going into next season. This team, of course, I mean, transfer portal hasn't been insane for this team. You're losing an offensive tackle to Bowling Green. Ivan Pace Jr., linebacker coming in from Miami, Ohio. You got Ben Bryant, quarterback coming in from Eastern Michigan, so we'll see how he does in that quarterback battle. McDonald, defensive back, he has left. Same thing with Monroe, a defensive end. And then Marquez Bell, a receiver's off to Old Dominion. Recruiting-wise, this team is 42nd in the nation, so 42nd isn't terrible, considering this team is in the group of 5. American Athletic Conference ranking is 1, and they got 2 4-stars, 17 3-stars coming in going into next season. But that said, let's look at your schedule now going into next season. And now, I mean, you don't have, Arkansas, that's going to be a tough game there to start off the season. Huge matchup. I mean, if you can beat the Razorbacks on the road in week 1, that is a really good sign for the season. That's obviously going to be a tough matchup. Razorbacks look really good return production-wise going into next season, and I mean they were really good last year. So, and then you got Kennesaw State on the 10th. You got Miami, Ohio, in a neutral location on the 17th. You got Indiana at home on the 24th. Tulsa on the road. South Florida at home. SMU on the road. UCF on the road, and the Navy, East Carolina, both at home. Temple on the road, and then Tulane at home to finish out the season. So, looking at the first half here. You got Arkansas. That's going to be tough there. I mean, I feel like for this team, I mean, it might take a couple of weeks for this team to really click, considering how much talent they're losing. So, I mean, that is a key factor in determining how good a team is going to be in the next season. I mean, most oftentimes you can determine that by looking at the returning production. This team obviously is really taking a beating there with the returning production going into next season. So, Arkansas, that's going to be, I'm going to favor the Razorbacks in that game. Definitely going to be a close one, but I'm going to favor the Razorbacks. Kennesaw State, Miami, Ohio, both easy wins. Indiana, Tulsa, I'm going to keep Indiana in the yellow just because that team, I mean, they were supposed to be good last year. I mean, all signs pointed to that team being good. They just weren't. But going into next season, potentially we see them improve. Tulsa on the road, potentially a tough one there, but I'm going to favor Cincinnati there. And then South Florida, easy wins. So I'm favoring you in 5 of your first 6, and I still think that Arkansas game is within reach for the Bearcats. And looking at the second half here, SMU, I'm going to say that's a close one, but I'm going to favor the Bearcats. UCF on the road, that's going to be tough. Obviously a tough place to play, and potentially the Knights could be good next season. So I do think the Bearcats probably will lose either to SMU or UCF. We'll see what happens there. I do think this team, I mean, we'll get to the record projection in a second. Navy, East Carolina, both easy wins. Temple on the road, just because it's on the road, I'm going to put it in yellow, but still favor the Bearcats. And then Tulane to finish out the season, I'd say easy wins. So record projection, 7-5 to 11-1. I think the ceiling for this team is 11-1. I do think this team takes a loss, at least one, down the stretch. I just don't know with the talent. I mean, this team is, once again, it's going to be more of a young team next season. And, I mean, that's pretty obvious by the return production. So, I mean, I do think this team at least takes one loss. And I do think this team is more than likely going to take a second loss as well. Once again, as I mentioned before, I think you lose to Arkansas, but you also lose to SMU or UCF. So you'll probably lose to 2 out of the 3 out of UCF, SMU, and Arkansas. But once again, I'll be going over every game one by one, and our official predictions coming out here in a couple of months. But yeah, I do think this team 7-5 to 11-1 is kind of a good range. I think 7-5, the floor is somewhat low. That's just in case. If this team just nothing clicks. But I do think this team is definitely, 8 to 10 win range. At least I'd say 9 to 10 win range is very much probable for this team. But that said, obviously, a lot of tough losses, and this team is going to be younger next year. But that just, if they do well next year, it looks really good heading into 2024. But that said, let me know your thoughts and comments below on this team, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.